Our streets. No peace. Our streets. No peace. Our streets.
From March 5th to March 9, members of Ayada Leads team traveled to Alabama to participate in a civil rights pilgrimage from Minneapolis to Selma. The purpose of the trip was to reconnect the legacy of past civil rights movements with the reality of today's struggle. The idea of the journey emerged during the recent Operation Metro Surge, where 4,000 law enforcement officers were deployed to our cities to address immigration issues that were often misrepresented. At the highest of the operation, our community organized neighborhood protection efforts and led protests to demand respect of people's constitutional rights. During this time, several national organizations came to Twin Cities in solidarity. Among them was the Rainbow Push Coalition, which reflected that what they witnessed in Minneapolis echoed the historic struggle of civil rights movement. Later, they extended an invitation for a delegation of Minnesotans to join them in Selma and march across the historic Edmund Pettus Bridge. It was a powerful and emotional experience. Now, I will be joined fellow team members who were part of the delegation to share our reflection, insights, and individual experience from this journey.
Hello, everybody. This is the Ayada Leads Selma Doc. I'm going to start off with the first question. Our first question here is, what moment from this trip stayed with you the most?
The march, it was an emotional day. It was something that I never thought I would be being a part of it. And that surprise, that emotion was, up to now, I'm still thinking about it. And, seeing all the different people, seeing the variety of multiracial people being a part of the march, and also reconnecting the legacy of the civil rights movement, it was really emotional. And that's one of the things that stayed with me. Of course, there are other things that I'm still, is in my mind, rethinking. We may one day go back to it and revisit.
The journey from Minneapolis to Selma was comprised by over 100 people from multi-ethnic, multiracial backgrounds, each involved in defending our communities from the federal enforcement occupation. Alongside Ayada Leads, the Minnesota delegation included Copal, Release Minnesota 8, the Somali American Coalition, ACLU, and others. We were also joined by elected officials, State Senator Omar Fateh, Attorney General Keith Ellison, and Reverend Yusuf Jackson from the Rainbow Push Coalition.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say visiting the Legacy Museum and seeing the National Monument to Freedom, seeing all of those names of people who were granted freedom after the Civil War was really emotional, and seeing people look for their family names, and like kids, the families, it was very beautiful and really, as you said, Hawan, emotional, really inspiring.
Starting in Minneapolis, we boarded a bus with several other organizations where we then traveled all the way to Chicago and stopped at Rainbow Push's headquarters. At the Rainbow Push headquarters, we were able to attend a beautiful dinner with the Reverend Yusuf Jackson, some of his family members, as well as attend the homegoing ceremony for the late Jesse Jackson. After stopping in Chicago for the evening, we then loaded the bus again, but this time with some more friends from Rainbow Push, and made our way down to Montgomery. After making it to Montgomery, we were able to take a little bit of a break before getting on another bus that took an hour to get to Selma outside of the city. I think something I think about a lot and I call back to on the trip was the moment when we were like, all right, it's time to continue on with our pilgrimage. And, everyone from Minnesota stood up and everyone was like clapping all at once. And a lot of the Chicagoans were going to follow with us in their own separate bus, but kind of go down the same path as us back to Selma. And to me, it really held strong in my heart that we're all in this together, even though our lives all look different and we're all coming from different places. I think that Minneapolis has kind of been that, existing point of having and continuing on those conversations about civil rights. And so that was kind of, it felt like even though I know we had driven already for 8 hours, but that kind of felt like the starting point really for me, like, whoa, this is something big that we're a part of. And then that kind of continuing on, once we did actually get to Selma, we did actually face the bridge with everyone there, with everyone from Chicago. It was just really eye-opening and like, whoa, I don't know how else to describe it. I was just in awe and felt very settled in like this shared mission. And I think back to it very often.
As we were departing Minneapolis, I remember looking out the window of the bus and seeing the posters of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And in that moment, I felt the weight of our pilgrimage and the importance of honoring the legacy and continuing the work of protecting our immigrant neighbors. Upon saying that we're connecting the legacy from the civil rights era then to what the civil rights era essentially now, it really just amplified it, because it's like these aren't just historical figures that we learned about in school. These are real people, and they're like really doing this work, and that's what we're doing now. It was kind of amazing to see that connection in real life.
I agree with you. I feel like that's something that, like, this is something that you can't learn, from a book alone. And I think that was something that was so beautiful about this trip, is that these are people who live far away from you, but they're so close to each of our hearts and each of our lives and the way we interact, in a community setting. And they're still out there walking around. And a lot of times we don't visualize them that way. We visualize them like, okay, as maybe words on a page or as old footage from the 1960s. No, these are real people walking around, and they're current, and their, fight for civil rights is urgent and it's continuous.
The other thing is, yes, it was really surreal almost to see, the people that you see on a TV or you read about him, but then them standing in front of you, it was strong. But imagine that they are not so remote from today, what we are experiencing here in Minneapolis. And the whole purpose of us traveling to Selma is because of the injustices that we are experiencing here in Minneapolis. And most of them, you would think that by now, discrimination, racism, all that would be done. But no, we're still really struggling.
All right, we are now on to our second question. The second question is, how did it feel when we actually walked across the bridge?
All right, so the moment when we began to cross the bridge, I will say that I felt this surge of excitement and overwhelming joy within me. We were finally walking in the actual footsteps on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. It was a very hot day. Everyone who came from Minneapolis, we were all standing together, united. It was powerful to see. We saw the flag waving in the background. I saw we chanting and how we said we have each other. Like, it was a very powerful moment. There's a moment where we're at the very top of the bridge, that this picture I took where we see waves of people and how we're all just carrying on the legacy as we walked across the bridge. It was amazing. It was truly amazing.
Yeah, walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge felt very surreal. I just felt like, what did the people in the 1960s walking on Bloody Sunday, how did they feel? And like what they were going through compared to like what we're going through as being from Minnesota and connecting those movements. Seeing the Minnesota state flag waving, seeing the banner of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, hearing from people who were there during Bloody Sunday, what their experience was like. It was really humbling, and feeling like our movements really are connected. History is not just in the past, like we are living history, we are making it, it is happening. It doesn't feel like it is when it's actually happening, but it's kind of like looking back on it. And walking with everyone from Minnesota and everyone who came out from all over the US to walk in history, walk through history, was really quite beautiful.
I think for me, what I thought a lot about as I was crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge alongside everyone really called back to the night prior when some of us went and had dinner with the Reverend Yusuf Jackson, and thinking about his words, talking about how Selma was once and still is and maintains its reputation to be a birthplace for civil rights, kind of being this portal of energy where people are coming together and advocating for these things. And the serendipity of people from Minneapolis, where similar things, in a new age, a new time of advocating for civil rights, people are kind of coming together, and there's maybe another portal that's opened in Minneapolis in a way of energy and urgency. And I was thinking about that as I was crossing the bridge, all these energies of all these different people, and thinking about, how history repeats itself in the bad ways, unfortunately, but also thinking about how we were all crossing the bridge and following in the footsteps of all the people that have come before us and have done that fight and have fought that fight, and how, you know, maybe history repeats itself in all those bad ways, but it also repeats itself in all those good ways, and how can we harness that kind of energy and urgency from the past into our motivations for the present. It was very beautiful and just very surreal to think about. Yeah. And also, you know, maybe a less serious comment, but kind of thinking about, I wonder what this would be like with no cell phone. Like, because they didn't have those back then. So I was just thinking about that as well.
That reminds me of when Reverend Yusuf Jackson was talking about how his father saw Bloody Sunday on the news and when he was in seminary school in Chicago, and then hopped in a car with classmates and journeyed all the way down to Selma to join the next day, the march on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and how our journey from Minneapolis to Chicago, then Chicago to Selma kind of matched that journey.
How I felt crossing the Pettus Bridge, I believe the same of what everybody else said, but one thing that I was thinking while I was crossing is oftentimes we hear people saying, I was with my ancestors, and I felt them and the ancestors being with me. That's what I felt when we go crossing. You know, I know that I'm from Africa, we are from the African diaspora. And of course, our ancestors are not, African American who experienced the most cruelty and discrimination in the United States. But at the same time, I felt that there were some, of the people who actually struggled and suffered way back, being with us and crossing. And also there was a couple of people, the organizations that were part of the pilgrimage. Brother, the picture is Renee Good and Alex Pretty, and I felt also them crossing with us the bridge. So the whole thing was emotional, at the same time powerful.
This is the third question, final question, and then we'll kind of move to conversation. This one is, after this trip, what responsibility do you feel moving forward?
So the responsibilities I would say I feel is one that we've already begun to do in our organization, which is, providing people with information and also making sure that people know they have the right to use their voice to vote. They have the right to give their own say on what happens to them within their own communities and within their own countries. Like Edmund Pettus Bridge was us essentially just carrying the baton and carrying the legacy forward. It was just a reminder, like, we've got this work now and we know what we're doing. But yeah, that was the responsibility I felt.
It looks like when we talk about the past, how racism has been changing, all that, it looks like we are doing one step ahead, but then two back. And right now, that's what we're feeling. And the responsibility that we have as an organization, as an individual, is to remember, learn from the past for sure. But at the same time, what is that we can change now? What else we can teach the community who did not have the opportunity to travel to Selma? It's the whole, us visiting the museum and seeing the struggle of what we experienced. It was positive learning, at the same time was really strong feeling. I remember, Eva, when we get out from the museum, you needed really some time to just recollect yourself, because it was extremely feeling what was in that space. So it's teaching people, educating our community, and our community, I mean African diaspora community, who don't know much of the African-American history, the struggles, everything that they experience and we're experiencing right now in a certain way, not necessarily the ugly racism that they experience.
Everything you said reminds me so much of, like, especially coming out of that museum and then all the work that has been done in the past and then the work that we're continuing to do reminds me so much of, I guess, the phrase, like, no one's going to make change for you. You have to make those steps yourself, because if you don't do it, no one's going to do it for you. And I think that going through the Legacy Museum and seeing how the conditions have been for people in the past who look like us, I always feel like a very close connection, because even though I'm African, my dad is from Cameroon, and I know that's where a lot of people were taken from, because it's right off of the coast. And I feel like there sometimes are divides when we have these conversations about struggle, but our struggle is borderless and it crosses oceans, and it has to do so much with the people that came before us and trying to readjust for the needs of today. Like a lot of these things that we're dealing with now are different, and I think that we have to be flexible with readjusting ourselves to the conditions of today.
Going through the Legacy Museum, going on the boat ride on the Alabama River, and learning the history of how the slave trade, of where they were sending people, and like some of the signs that said like you're standing in the place where they sold enslaved people. Like I was saying earlier, just walking in history, and that it's all around us, coming from Minnesota, where sometimes we're far removed from the legacy of the United States. Just walking in that history was very emotional, seeing all the posters of the people. Even that, what was it, when you picked up the phone and you heard the stories of people who are incarcerated, even connecting the transatlantic slave trade to mass incarceration today, and just hearing stories of people who are incarcerated. It was really, really emotional. I got a little teary-eyed at the end, I'm not gonna lie. It was quite emotional.
Yeah, agree. There is something, and the museum, the Legacy Museum we visited, it has different exhibitions, but all was related to racism and discrimination and how African American community have been harmed. Well, most of the things were things that we already knew, but there's something strong when there is a visual to attach to the things that you already knew. For example, we know that racism reinvents itself, and it's, there is different iterations of racism from 400 years ago. But seeing when you walk into the big room where they start from the slavery, they're showing the pictures, and then segregation, and gradually showing you how the discrimination is changing up to the police brutality and incarceration, you'll be like, oh my God, is this what our people have been going through and is still going through? So that is something I'm like, I knew it, but seeing, and whoever did that, they were amazing and smart. And the reason they did it is to evoke actually that sentiment that we all felt was, is this what the people went through and is still going through? So again, it was powerful.
Something Haban had mentioned that actually reminded me of this was seeing the very beginning from slavery to like police brutality and mass incarceration. So on the wall, there was a timeline. I don't know if you guys remember. Mm-hmm. And at the very last one, you can see there was an addition, and we see how George Floyd's murder was auctioned there as well. It's just another reminder of how like the pilgrimage that we took from Minneapolis to Selma, it was almost like we were meant to be there.
I really love that you brought up the concept of racism reinventing itself, and how I think that a lot of people view racism, and especially the Legacy Museum, maybe because it's particularly, it's rooted in that subject. But I think a lot of people don't maybe view it as something that impacts them if they're not impacted by racism. And I think that to tie this all back to Minneapolis and what we've seen with, federal law enforcement agents on the ground, and seeing that engagement with the population, being able to see kind of how slavery has transgressed into this beast of mass incarceration, police brutality, and how those same exact concepts that, are utilized on, a specific group of people that are, unfortunately have been forced to get used to these types of brutality, are now being inflicted on larger portions of the population that want to stand up for these community members. And so racism is something that impacts every single person, even if you don't fall into the category of being a Black individual or African or African American. The fact that these systems are able to impact our neighbors, and it's allowed and it's embedded within, the society that we all live in, is something that we will all have to face at some point, and we will all have to stand up for at some point.
Reminds me of the origins of policing in the United States, going from slave catchers to militarized police force that we have now, and that everything really is connected. The militarization of the police in the United States,
globally. It's just all connected.
Everything really is that deep.
Yeah.
They try to tell you it's not deep. Everything really is that deep.
So, in the words of the great and late Reverend Jesse Jackson,
Keep hope alive.
Okay, thank you so much for listening to our documentary. If you want to support us, please donate, follow our social medias, and we'll see you in the next one. Ayada.